So, hi, this is Tinna. This will be Halldór. This is Salka. Þetta Guðlaugur Þór. This is Guðlaugur Þór. Due respect. And this is Bill. Broad shoulders. And I'm Halldór. And I've been asked to be the clown on this gathering. Help this conversation. And so we'll start by giving you some sense of who we are and what makes us tick. And I wanted to, or you could also ask what gets you up in the morning. And I wanted to start with you, Guðlaugur. Why did you take on environment, climate, and energy? And what gets you going in the morning?
I mean, it's a fantastic job.
Yes.
It's a fantastic opportunity. Of course, it's a big challenge, but that's the reason it's so exciting. And when we get where we want to go, of course, it's an endless battle. It's something that we will all enjoy. And it's, especially when we have the sunlight again, it's really exciting to wake up in the morning and work on these fantastic, I would say, opportunities.
Wonderful. Salka.
Yeah, hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Salka. I lead one of the negotiations teams that worked on COP26 for the UK government. Now, what gets me up in the morning is really building bridges between governments, businesses, and people to rise above differences and find common solutions to climate problems, ideally within the international system.
Bill, I know it can be challenging for you to get up in the morning when you come here with jet lag, but what motivates you?
Absolutely. Það mér heiður að vera hér.
Oh.
And thank you. Ég tala svolítið íslensku, bara not til að komast í vandræðum. I've been here almost 50 times now. So we have a rather significant project that we've been developing here in the Reykjavík area. And with our partners, Borealis Data Center, are going to be developing an advanced computing facility up in Blönduós. And the purpose of this facility is to focus on energy transition work, space sustainability work, how we use Earth's orbits, as well as to establish an Arctic Maritime Information Center. The tools that we are going to use to really bring all of those things together are really high-level supercomputing, artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning, and even quantum computing. And what I think is a little bit different about our approach as opposed to some other national level computing centers are out there is we're starting to use these tools in tandem. One example, if I may. When we take a look at wind farms, if we were to use just normal supercomputers, the best that you can do to really figure out the optimal placement of a particular turbine is a 3x3 grid. Now, of course, what wind farm across the world looks like a 3x3 matrix? But with the advent of using both supercomputing and artificial intelligence together, in the computers that we have today, we can start to enable ourselves to really take a look at what real-world wind farms look like. And a slight misplacement is very difficult to undo and can cost you millions of dollars. So solving a lot of these challenges really keeps me going.
Yeah, let's get back to some of those things when the s'mores are ready and things get a bit sweeter.
Definitely.
Tinna, you're leading youth environment, what's it called? Environment in...
The Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association.
Wow.
So it's a bit shorter than Icelandic. It's Umhverfissinnar. But for those who don't know, it's a youth-led independent NGO, and we have over 1,300 members all across the country. And I've been in the NGO for 5 years now. But at the same time, I've been finishing my studies, so I'm now completing my master's in environment and natural resources. And what really gets me up in the morning is to acquire new knowledge and to apply that knowledge to make a difference and in the most efficient way. So it's really, for me, it's knowledge-driven activism and knowledge-driven empowerment. And that maybe sounds a bit vague, so I'll just give you a quick example. For example, for the parliamentary elections in Iceland last September, my NGO created a criterion to evaluate the climate and environmental policies of all parties. So we had 78 statements which we wanted to get into their policies. It was very science-based. We had citations, we had arguments as to why we need it. We gave it to them months prior, so they had plenty of time to adjust their policies if they wanted to, and many of them surely did. And then once we got the final policies, we graded them. And therefore, we gave the public a tool, one of the tools that they could use to make an informed decision in the elections. And now we're going to follow it up, because we have clearly documented everything they promised to do. So now we need to hold them accountable. So looking at you, Guðlaugur.
Scorecard. And so it's been wonderful to work with that organization. Let me just say that. I should say, just so you know who I am, I've basically had a long-standing love affair with carbon dioxide. And it's got a pretty bad name now. So when I was working on my PhD in the Rocky Mountains, there was a fork in the road. I could go for the sexy stuff at the moment, and that was the ozone layer and UVB radiation. And the other option was to go for carbon. And I went for carbon. And I'm still here. And that's, it's been a wonderful journey. And I really want to kind of build on what we just heard about, and it might be news to you, but we're all part of nature. And we really depend on nature. And we need to save nature to save ourselves. So it's not a battle with nature, it's a partnership with nature. So that's kind of what has motivated me. I then had the pleasure of working on being an international civil servant and helped deliver the Paris Agreement, which was a wonderful moment. So you see here we have a nice mix. We have a representation from the government of Iceland, where you're now. And so I think it would be interesting for everyone here to just hear from you, kind of, Guðlaugur, in terms of what's the strategy that you address these challenges? I mean, what is the, maybe not the plan, but what's the intention? Where are you going?
Well, first of all, when we speak about this, I think it's important just, there's a one word that is the key. Yeah. It's determination. Because our aim is very simple. We're going to see to it that the Icelandic economy are competitive in a net zero economy when it comes to, and we need to remain there. But at the same time, and you can easily say there are so many challenges, it's so difficult. Then I just say, look a little bit back. Mm-hmm. See to the ones who came before us. Because we have done this twice when it comes to energy transition. And it's actually, then we just decided to go there, and then we found ways. And what we did then, and that was a totally different, we were a very poor nation, and it was very, and we can be very thankful for the people who came before us. But we know that we need innovation, we need entrepreneurship, we need to work with others, we cannot do it alone. And the Icelandic government is going to see to it that the regulatory framework is as good as possible to see that we will flourish and get where we want to go. And it's a balancing act. There is a lot of challenges that we need to look at. Of course, nature preservation, we need to see to it that the poor, they're not going to take the cost and all kinds of things. But determination is the key to get where you want to go. And what I think it's good that we have a broad political consensus when it comes to achieving these goals.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and a desire to get there.
The desire is there, and I think it's also that we have such a good story to tell. Mm-hmm. No one because it was not easy when we went to this energy transition. It was not an easy job. We were actually, especially when it came to geothermal, we were the only one doing it. It's not like the ones who came before us that they had an easy job, but no one says that we shouldn't have done it. We have the economy benefited, definitely the environment, and we have all kinds of benefits. And I hope that the guests who are here will see a little bit of our country, and you will see hot tubs all around the country. And I promise you, you will love it. But that's just one of the many things that is beneficial when we go through energy transition.
Yeah, there's one of these myths that you might have heard that Churchill taught Iceland how to use geothermal. Let me just correct the record. Churchill, as many of you know, he loved hot bath. And he knew how difficult and how expensive it was to have hot bath in his residence. And then he came to Iceland. I think he stopped here for 4 hours or so. A little bit more. And he saw hot water just kind of coming out of the ground, and he just wanted to stay. And so it's really interesting to underline all of this, because you have to have a purpose. You have to have something to work for. And the Paris Agreement is very much a mission-driven endeavor. And Salka, you work for the UK government, which it holds the jointly with Italy the presidency of the Conference of the Parties. And so you're a civil servant there. And can you share with us kind of what your experience was in terms of going through Glasgow and what Glasgow achieved, but more importantly, what's happening after Glasgow? And do you think you managed to release the desire to work together and deliver results?
Yeah, thank you, Halldór. And I mean, if I may just start with the science. I mean, the science has shown that we need to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees to reduce the worst impacts of climate change. So we set ourselves for COP26 the objective of keeping 1.5 alive. This is not an easy task. You have just under 200 countries in the UN with differing interests and positions, and you need to bring them all together to try and find consensus. And even with the Paris Agreement, as you just mentioned, the landmark agreement that had the idea that all stakeholders have a role to play in tackling these problems, we were still on track for about 3 degrees of global warming. So it's really, we've made some progress recently, but perhaps not enough, and we really set ourselves for COP26 to scale up and have progress much faster. We're now in a place where about 90% of the world's economy is covered by net zero targets, which is up from 30% just 3 years ago before we took on the presidency role. So Glasgow really agreed that pathway to keep 1.5 alive and do it quicker. I'm going to mention a few examples for what we did. For example, we expect all countries to revisit and strengthen their emission reduction targets this year and operate a ratchet mechanism whereby your targets gets more ambitious every year, which moves us fast to the journey. We also did up more work to scale up climate finance, and this is really the support from developed countries to developing countries to ensure that they have the support needed for a green transition, the energy transition, green jobs, but equally to adapt to the impact of climate change that are already happening in a lot of these communities, and particularly in developing countries. We also had very pivotal language on phasing down coal and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which is the first time the UN Climate Agreement has addressed these problems. And now the role is really to implement this agreement. We already have consensus of what needs to happen. So it's not about what needs to happen, it's about how we do it and how quickly we now do it. The expectation is there. We need to shift from negotiations to implementing these agreements and act on what countries have said they're going to do.
And is there anything left to negotiate? Isn't basically the negotiations almost finished?
Well, you can always negotiate terms to do it quicker and better and faster. Yeah. But the global agreement, they already exists with the Paris Agreement, with the Glasgow Climate Pact. So it's now really about using these climate conferences to really accelerate implementation, which will be the focus of COP27, which Egypt will hold, will be really to focus on implementation and action and accountability.
So, I mean, I think that's a very important concept for you here in the audience, is the focus is on the how, not the what. And that's where innovation comes in. That's where also the kind of investment comes in. And I always get dizzy when I'm with investors because they use very big numbers. But one thing I did learn is this is not so much about more investment, it's about smarter investment. It's actually redirecting the investment, putting it in the right places. And how would you see this, Bill, in terms of what is now needed to actually mobilize the investment, mobilize the innovation, and make it happen fast enough so that it actually helps us on this journey? And how can we pull out the stops?
Well, for us, I think the formula would be different than the way we've approached the Reykjavik Institute, in that for us it was kind of a labor of love, and there are a number of happy coincidences that have happened along the way that I think are really set us up for success over the long term. So for instance, an example is that Iceland is a great waypoint between North American and European space interests. But I think if we're successful with what we do, I think it'll be an example of the kind of idea that I have beating around in my head all the time, that yes, there has to be tactical innovation, and you can see tactical innovation everywhere you go around Reykjavik this week with Innovation Week. It's remarkable to see the climate here and to see a different kind of climate, but the atmosphere, again, another funny word to use. It's quite healthy, and I've had some folks describe it to me as the way Silicon Valley was in the very beginning in the 70s when things started to take off. But that said, there also needs to be strategic innovation.
Yeah.
And strategic innovation are the types of resourcing that the government puts forth to allow organizations such as ourselves to come in or to attract other FDI. As an example might be, you look at what Ireland did with data centers, you look at other centers of excellence that popped up around the world. A place close to home, Rochester, New York, at one time was the optics capital of the world. And what kind of things does government need to do to turn Iceland from and I'll steal one of the phrases of one of my venture capitalist friends, how to turn a good story into a good deal. Iceland is a good deal in a great, variety of ways, but I think the ability to take, and to lure additional types of institutes into Iceland really sets up an environment where that's kind of a nest or an anchor, and out of that comes all different, intellectual property. We can point in the computing world to some examples where the actual computing center might have only returned 2 to 3x over a 10-year period, but the intellectual property that spawned out of it was a 10 to 15x multiplier. So in other words, it's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing, if you're interested in the Vikings, don't just rely on Netflix. And it's really interesting to think of kind of what the Vikings would be doing today if they were with us. Some of the genes are still here in this room. But it's really interesting, this kind of exploratory part of our heritage. In a sense, I think Icelanders are actually more nomads than farmers and hunter-gatherers. Yeah. And which can be good when you need to get something fast and happening fast. And I think Icelanders are good at that because they get bored if things take a long time. So I think it would be really wonderful if we can, and one of the things I picked from how you were describing it is an alignment. Aligning it with other things that are happening, and that's how we need to get things going.
Yeah. If I may only take a minute, I want to give one other example too, but it's on the completely opposite end of the spectrum. I think one of the things that I see, especially with a son who just graduated with a degree in sustainable systems engineering and his undergrad was in biomaterials engineering. You know, one of the things that I've really noticed is there's probably a lot of folks in the room that say, aside from activism, what can I do? And I look at, you know, the airline industry at this point, and the airline industry, every time they go out and they sample people and say, would you like to take part in purchasing carbon offsets, you know, for your flight? 85% of all passengers say, yes, I'll sign up. The reality is that less than 1% do. So if you're the type of person that, you know, calculus or differential equations makes you dizzy, you know, there are a whole host of roles in marketing and business development and other business roles that will advance, you know, the things that we're trying to accomplish, not only for the climate, but for the way humans interact with our planet moving forward. You could talk about that with plastics, or, you know, how we're utilizing space and so on down the line. You know, there's room for everybody.
And how old will you be in 2050?
Well, I'm 27 now, so we can, yeah.
Can you do the math? Well, now in terms of, I mean, the time perspective is different for you, and you're finishing your masters now, and you're kind of. What's your sense of time now? Are we sensing sufficiently the urgency? Are we too relaxed about all of this? Do we need to be more anxious? Do we need to be moving faster?
Yeah, well, I think
this is actually a too easy question. Of course, yeah.
I'm going to give you a bit more complex than just a yes or no, so no worries.
Yes.
I think that we're now at a point where we all acknowledge that the climate change is by far the biggest threat facing the stability of our societies. But nevertheless, we seem to be under the illusion that we can solve this massive problem by making incremental changes here and there, because I mean, if we're always thinking about it, we're always acting on it, we must eventually solve it. And that might well be the case if we hadn't wasted decades in which we knew about the severity of the situations, but did not act accordingly. So now we're at a point in which average annual global greenhouse gas emissions are at their highest levels in human history, and we need emissions to peak the latest by 2025. That's just around the corner. So we're basically at crossroads to secure the livelihood of future generations. And we need to acknowledge that the mindset we've had, we need a complete shift, because we see that what we've been doing now is not delivering the results we need. And it's good to think that, to like put this out there, like the most like dangerous catastrophic events, I feel, are those that happen gradually. They unfold themselves right before our eyes. And it's this omnipresence of climate change that's kind of desensitized us to the problem. So we can't really believe, or at least we cannot feel, that the worst impacts will actually hit us. But it's certain that they will if we don't act now. And this all seems really bleak, but the scientific consensus is very clear. The window of opportunity is open, but it's closing fast. So we need to really think about the scale and the pace of change we need, because otherwise this won't happen.
Precisely, but maybe we should end by thinking a little bit into the future, both in terms of what kind of future we are working towards. What's the vision? What kind of climate neutral future are we working towards? But also this notion of, will this be a non-linear transformation? And who would have, I mean, the whole discussion on energy is completely different now, given geopolitical developments. And one thing I think we need to be very honest is that the current situation that we're moving out of is not the best. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the consequences of using fossil fuels are quite devastating, even though forget about climate. Mm-hmm. Health and also the totalitarian regimes that shelter using this energy system. And so let's just think now about the future, and both in terms of the promise of the future, but also what are these kind of the non-linear things that can actually make things happen. And so let's make that kind of the final round. And let's use the same sequence. How do you see this? You've been a Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so geopolitics are not something new to you. And do you share my sense that basically we are seeing the end of the fossil fuel era?
Well, I totally agree what you have been said here, but I think, and I want just to, if I may add a little, that I think we need to bear in mind we will not be judged on what we say, it's what we do. And you have always, everyone does agree that we have to do it, but the challenge is to move forward, and everyone has to be on board. And it's not like you mentioned, it's not only because of the climate crisis we are now seeing, and that happened gradually, and we saw it for a very long time, that it's also a national security issue when it comes to energy. And I'm not going to go to my old job and talk about how unwise it was to be in the position we are now, and it had horrendous consequences. But I also think that it's important that we have some kind of vision to see where we want to be. And it's not only that we will have a cleaner and better environment, and if we would start it 50, 60, 70 years ago on this journey, we would find this natural. At the same thing as when it comes to the energy transition in Iceland, no one wants to go back. It's perfectly normal. And we will see that when it comes to cars, trucks, flights, ships, and we will have definitely a better place to live in, and also a safer place, which is really important for everyone, especially our kids and coming generations.
Do you agree that that incrementalism is not the solution? We need to be more transformative in our approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And you asked sort of what future do we want to see? I think it's a future where we don't see a trade-off between net zero and the economy. We have that alignment where you mentioned earlier, and we often like to refer to this as an ambition loop where bold government policies go hand in hand with private sector leadership and innovation. And I mean, Kjartan, you mentioned this earlier this morning as well when we started this day about how the innovations the brilliant people in this room are creating don't often fit into regulatory frameworks. So it needs to have a conversation and collaboration with governments to have that very sort of good deal, as Bill said. And if I may as well, you talked about it being non-linear. I think we need to address as well the geopolitical context that, in a way, that climate sometimes seems to be competing with other crises. I mean, we had the COVID crisis, we have a war in Ukraine, we have rising energy prices, and we need to find a way for climate not to take a back seat when we have other crises going on, and really link into a green recovery and link climate into everything else that's happening to ensure it stays on the front page of newspapers.
I'm told it's going to rain soon, so we need to kind of be crisp on this. What's your take on this?
Well, there's so much to say, but I think, excuse me, always happens at the worst time. I would just hearken back to 1961, May, John F. Kennedy doing the Man on the Moon speech. Now, granted, the context was a lot different, but the main impetus that came out of that was really a plan of action. Had he suggested, well, let's take a couple of years to talk about all the feasibility studies of going to the moon, it would not have been a national total effort to really have something that not only put humanity on the moon, but spawned so much science and technology that benefits us in ways today that we entirely take for granted. So I'd like to see more moon shots.
Yeah. Basically, we're going, you figure out how.
Yeah.
Tinna, final word.
Final word, wow, pressure. Yeah, I think that we need innovative new solutions because we have huge technological gaps for the future, but we also have tools and the know-how to act now on what we need in the upcoming years, so there's really no threshold. And we see that these arguments that have been put forth, first we had climate deniers saying the science wasn't real. Now it's been shifting to it's too expensive. But if we just look at the science, we look at the third working groups from the assessment report number 6 from the IPCC, we see that the mitigation actions, the cost of them to reach our climate goals will only drop GDP by a few percentages on a global scale, compared to business as usual. And that is not even taking into account the economic benefits of avoided adaptation costs or the cost of the consequences of the climate. So literally, all the evidence is here. We know what we need to do, and we know how. So, yeah.
The most expensive thing is not to do it.
Exactly.
Basically. And you out there, you figure it out, you do it, and we'll check on you. So thank you very much.